High on the mountainside by the little cabin, in the cool, clear crisp of evening, Stubby Pringle swings into the saddle. He looks like a bear. He has on heavy leather chaps over patched corduroy pants. A fleece-lined jacket bulks his body. 2 bandana handkerchiefs are tied about his neck. He has on heavy leather gloves that blunt his fingers. A battered hat is pulled down until it touches his ears. But if we could see under all these clothes, why shucks, he is just a boy. He hasn't reached his 20th birthday yet, but don't let that fool you. He was orphaned at 13 and has been doing a man's work since he was 15. His horse is a flop-eared, ewe-necked, cat-hipped horse that should have died 2 months ago. But it has iron rods for body, for bones, and is dynamite fueled. It's a good horse, the kind of horse that could carry a man from here to eternity and back again. Stubby Pringle sits his saddle. He pats right-handed saddlebag. It contains a 2-pound box of fancy chocolates. He pats left-handed saddlebag. It contains the material for a nice dress. Interesting items, yes. Ammunition he has for the campaign he has in mind, to capture the affections of one of the pretty girls down at the schoolhouse. Old Jake hollers from the cabin door. Only a fool would be going out on a night like this, but if and I was your age, I guess I'd be doing the same thing. Squeeze one of them for me. Stubby Pringle is just one of the many far-scattered, underpaid, close-patched cowboys that inhabit this part of the range. But he is Stubby Pringle, a true-born son of one of the wildest, most reckless men. And this is his night to howl. He plans to stomp the floorboards of the schoolhouse until the walls shake, and to kick his heels higher than the lanterns that line those walls, and to whirl some willing female until she's dizzy enough to see behind the patched clothes and see the man that's behind them. Stubby Pringle lifts his reins, the horse lifts his feet, and they go ambling off down over the benchland toward the valley and the schoolhouse. Stubby Pringle is a cowboy, born with spurs on, raised on tarantula juice, and weaned on rawhide. He shouts wahoo, skip-to-maloo, do-si-do, and roundabout, and then he rides on till he sees a faint light far down in the schoolhouse. And then he says, wahoo, all gals, women, and grandmothers, lift your skirts and start to skippin', I'm a-comin'. And then he spurs his horse, and it leaps like a mountain lion down over the crusted snowbanks. And they ride recklessly on, dodging trees and rocks, until they come to the last low ridge that hides the valley and the schoolhouse. And then he hears something, sounds like somebody chopping wood. Now, what darn fool would be chopping wood on Christmas Eve? Stubby Pringle is a cowboy through and through, a cowboy clear to the marrow, and nothing strange is going to happen on the range without him investigating. He reins his horse to the right, and then he sees a faint light coming from a cabin window that is covered with oilcloth. Oh yes, the Hendersons, homesteaders, people who are betting the government that they can starve off starvation for 5 years in exchange for 160 acres that just might support 4 head of cattle. Homesteaders who are always out of everything. Out of food and out of money, out of tools and out of machinery. out of smiles and the joy of living, out of everything with exception of maybe hope and stubborn endurance. Then he sees a woman chopping wood and reins his horse in close. The woman raises the axe and hits the log. The axe bounces and nearly hits her ankle. What are you trying to do, hurt yourself? The woman just stares at him. Stubby says, chopping wood is a man's job. Where's your man? He's in the cabin sick. Doc says he'll be okay, but he's mighty weak now. Stubby Pringle looks toward the last low ridge that hides the valley in the schoolhouse and says, I reckon they'll just be getting started. I reckon I'll chop you some wood. Stubby Pringle is now a woodsman, born with an axe in his hand, raised on pine needles and weaned on pine cones. He could hew down a whole pine forest. The chips are falling like snowflakes. Stubby leans the axe against his stump and scoops up whole cords of wood and packs into the cabin and stacks them on both sides of the fireplace until there's enough wood to last for 2 weeks of wintry weather. And then he looks about the cabin. A man lies in the bed with the covers over his head, snoring softly. In the back room, behind a thin curtain, there is a small girl with her head just showing above the quilts. In the other side of the room is a small boy. Well, if he was awake and standing, he would be waist high. Stubby says, I've got to be going, and starts toward the door. But then he stops. Something is missing. Where's your Christmas tree? The kids have to have a Christmas tree. The woman sighs and says, I haven't had time to cut one. Stubby looks toward the last low ridge that hides the valley in the schoolhouse and says, I reckon they'll be stomping the floorboards until pretty late tonight. I still have some time. He goes out into the woods and takes the axe. He is now Stubby Pringle, an expert on Christmas trees, raised on pine needles and weaned on pine cones. He spies the proper tree and hews it down. He carries it into the cabin on his shoulders and sets it up pert and pretty in the center of the room in front of the fireplace. And then he says, there now, get your things and decorate the tree. I've got to be going. The woman sighs and says, we have no things. Stubby looks toward the last low ridge that hides the schoolhouse and the valley and says, I reckon they'll be sashaying around near morning. I still have some time. Stubby Pringle takes off his heavy gloves, he takes off his hat, he takes off fleece-lined jacket, and takes off the bandana handkerchiefs. He tells the woman what to do, and he does plenty himself. Now he is Stubby Pringle, born in poverty, raised on nothing, and weaned on less, taught to get along on little and to expect a whole lot less. A miracle has taken shape. Pinto beans are strung on thread and wrapped around the Christmas tree and shine in the firelight. The bandana handkerchiefs are cut into strips and tied in bows on the end of the branches and look like gay red flowers. Snippings from the fleece-lined jacket are sprinkled on the tree and look like falling snow. There now, says Stubby, get the kids' things and put under the tree. I've got to be going. But he knows without turning his head. The woman sinks into a chair. Tears are streaming down her face, and she says, go on, they are good young'uns. They don't expect a thing. They understand. Stubby goes out of the cabin, but he returns. He has a package in one hand and a fine block of pine wood in the other. He tosses the package into the woman's lap and says, "There's the makings of a right nice dress. A needle and threader like you can probably sew up a dress in no time. I'll just sit here and whittle out something for the boy." The woman's fingers are flying, stitch, stitch, stitch. A dress is taking shape. It's a fine dress, all flounced, and it has puff sleeves, the kind of dress that will bring smiles and the joy of living. Stubby Pringle sits whittling with his 7-bladed pocket knife, which he always carries in his pocket. Something has taken shape. It's a horse. It's a fine horse, the kind of horse that could carry a waist-high boy from here to eternity and back again. The woman has fallen asleep in the chair now and snoring softly. Stubby takes the horse and puts under the tree. He takes the dress and puts under the tree. And then he goes out of the cabin, but he returns. He places the 2-pound box of fancy chocolates in the woman's lap. Then he looks at the man on the bed. It wouldn't be right to forget him. So he takes the 7-bladed pocket knife and places on the quilts, and then he is gone. He rides to the top of the last low ridge that hides the valley and the schoolhouse. "Hold it, Stubby." The lights are blinking out in the schoolhouse. Dark objects are moving away from the schoolhouse yard. Well, the moon is getting low in the heavens. Now what is that? Crawling slowly up the mountainside. It is a flop-eared, ewe-necked, cat-hipped horse. Just that, nothing more, worn and weary. In the saddle sits Stubby Pringle, with his head bowed and his shoulders slumped and his eyes half closed. He is Stubby Pringle, one of the far-fetched, underpaid, clothes-patched cowboys that inhabit this part of the range. He is that, but he is something more. He is one of the greatest things that's happened to the human race. He has given of his time, he has given of his meager possessions, and he will go through life bringing smiles and the joy of living to others along the way. But he is thinking of none of that now. He is thinking of dances undanced, of floorboards unstomped, and of girls unwhirled. And then he is thinking of Christmases gone by, and of a small boy born in poverty, lying in front of the fireplace, looking through an old Christmas catalog. And then he hears something, sleigh bells. Yes, I'm telling this straight. And then he sees antlered heads and streaming bodies and feet that don't seem to touch the ground. And then he sees something bulky and a man with white whiskers and a jolly face. And then in the whistling of the wind he hears these words, "Well done, partner." Stubby Pringle blinks his eyes and says, "I haven't had a thing to drink." He is now Stubby Pringle, a cowboy through and through, a cowboy clear to the marrow. He stands 10 feet tall, and nothing strange is going to happen on the range without him investigating it. He swings from the saddle, fumbles in his pockets, and strikes a match. Unmistakable reindeer tracks. Stubby swings back into the saddle. He doesn't have to spur the horse now. The horse understands. It is now a gigantic horse that seemed to have wings. It takes 40-foot strides and is dynamite fuel. And they streak up the mountainside to the little cabin so that Stubby can get a few hours sleep before a hard day's work on the morrow. Stubby enters the cabin and crawls into a cold bunk. Old Jake hollers from the bunk on the other side of the room. Well, was it worth the long ride? Stubby says, yes, I had a good time. Well, I know, and I know that you know, and any darn fool ought to know. that sometimes when you're out on the range you hear and see strange things. That icicles falling from the pine trees sometimes sounds like sleigh bells. And that deer make the same kind of tracks as reindeer. And that sometimes when the wind is whistling through the treetops, it sounds like a man making words. But we could talk and talk, and it would make no difference to Stubby. He is smarter than we are. He knows what he saw out on the mountainside that Christmas Eve. He saw a man with white whiskers and a jolly face and a bouncing belly, and that he heard these words, "Well done, partner."
Monday night.